Hey everybody, Qroo here. Welcome to the second lesson in my master course. In the last lesson, we talked about Spanish pronunciation, and I introduced you to the AL cognate trick. Now the AL cognate trick is cool, but it is not the most useful cognate trick out there. Today I'm going to be showing you the big one, the one that's really going to propel your Spanish. And then, this is the cool part, you're going to be using that cognate trick to form complete sentences in Spanish, to translate them. Sentences that you may never have heard or seen before, but they're going to be correct. I know that may sound impossible, but it's not. It's all about learning language patterns and then repeating them. So let's get into our cognate trick. We're going to be calling this one the TION-CION cognate trick. What we're going to be doing is taking words in English that end in TION, like these: creation, invitation, documentation, information, and verification. Now to convert these into Spanish, it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to change that last T into a C, and then we're going to put an accent over that last O. That's going to tell us where to put the emphasis when we pronounce this word. So we get creación, invitación, documentación, información, and verificación. So that wasn't too hard, right? Actually, converting the words was the easy part, pronouncing them was probably the hard part. Now, with cognates, they're pretty good, but they don't work all the time. There's going to be some words that don't fit it, and it's not really going to be clear why. One that comes up a lot is translation. It doesn't become translación. The Spanish word for translation is actually traducción. Traducción. Why doesn't it follow the cognate trick? I don't know, it just doesn't. So when you encounter words like that, you're just going to have to learn them, individually. The good news is that this cognate trick does work the majority of the time, so you can trust it, and you can make an educated guess at a word. And worst thing that's going to happen is if you're wrong, the person's going to be like, ¿qué? Or if you're close, they're probably going to tell you the correct word. So if you said something like translación, the person would probably say traducción. And you go, oh, now I know. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and translate the 4 words that are on the screen: decoration, elevation, continuation, and confirmation. Take your time with it. Feel free to pause the video if you need to. Now, when I was learning this, it helped me to actually write them out on a piece of paper, but hey, you be you, okay? Let me get a little coffee while you work it out. Get parched doing this. All right, are you ready? Decoration becomes decoración. All we did was change the T to a C, put an accent over the O, right? And change the way we pronounce it. Decoración. Elevation becomes elevación. Elevación. Continuation becomes continuación. Continuación. Now that one's a little bit, got to move your mouth a lot, it's a bunch of vowels in there. It's a good one to practice on. And our last one, confirmation, becomes confirmación. Confirmación. Now when you're dealing with any cognates in Spanish, whether it's the AL one or the TION, CION one, or ones we're going to talk about, there may be some spelling changes in the root of the word. So let's talk about some of those common root changes. Number 1 on the list is going to be English words that begin with an S but are followed by a consonant will pick up an extra E at the beginning of it. Speculation would become especulación, and station would become estación. Now this isn't just with the TION-CION cognate trick, it's with all of them. This is just going to be the pattern. So if we have this word, special, right? It's an AL word. How do we turn that into Spanish? We're just adding the E. Especial, especial. So now you go ahead and try one. Stipulation, stipulation. Ready? Estipulación, estipulación. Did you get it? If you did, you're doing a great job here. All right, let's go on to the next category. And this is going to be double letters in the English word that aren't pronounced individually, so they're not changing the sound. Those are going to become single letters in Spanish. Recommendation. See, we're not saying recommendation. It's just one sound. So in Spanish, one letter. Recomendación, recomendación. You try this one. Communication. Ready? Comunicación. 1M. So that's going to be the pattern. However, when we have double letters in English, but we're actually pronouncing each one of them, they tend to stay double letters in Spanish. Here's a great example. Cooperation. See, we're saying cooperation, cooperation. So this is going to stay that way. We're going to keep both those letters in Spanish. Cooperación, cooperación. Now, words in English that have double R's tend to keep the double R's, but when we pronounce it in Spanish, we're going to have to do that r, that trill, right? Here's an example of that. Narration. See our double R there? We're going to keep it on the Spanish side, but we're going to have to roll those R's. Narración, narración. Another good one is irritation. Irritación, irritación. So those are some patterns you can follow, but sometimes you're going to see root changes in certain cognates that don't really fit a pattern, and you're just going to have to learn those individually. Here's some common ones. Demonstration becomes demostración. See, it lost an N. And immigration becomes inmigración. So one of the M's turned into an N. And humiliation becomes humillación, humillación. We actually picked up the double L, and because a double L in Spanish is going to sound like a Y or a J, we're going to have to pronounce it that way. So when you encounter words like that, you're just going to have to learn them individually. Sorry about that, folks. But here's a pattern that you can learn. Let's get back to those, all right? When you have your English word and it's one of our cognates and you see TH, it's just going to become a T on the Spanish side. Autorización, autorización. Now remember that these root changes are going to apply to other cognates as well. So, go ahead and do this one. Lethal. What do you think that becomes? Ready? Letal, letal. Now, we're not done with our cognate trick just yet, but I need to touch on the gender of nouns before we proceed, because I don't know what your level is. Some of you folks are pretty advanced, some of you are new. So let's hit this real quick so then we can start making sentences. All right, it's going to be a lot of fun. Every noun in Spanish is assigned a gender, either masculine or feminine. Even inanimate objects like a chair or a car have gender. Let's start with masculine nouns. They often end with an O, but not always. Libro, book, carro, car. But in Spain, a car is coche. Ends with an E, it's a masculine noun. Let's move on to feminine nouns. Feminine nouns in Spanish often end with an A, but not always. Casa, house, escuela, school, mesa, table. And some examples of ones that don't end with A. Lección, lesson, flor, flower, ciudad, city, imagen, image. Now you're gonna love this part. All of the nouns that we're creating with our TION, CION cognate trick will be feminine. That's going to make it so much easier down the road because you're going to know exactly which definite and indefinite article to use. Now I know you're probably like, definite, indefinite article, what's Paul talking about? Now don't let the grammatical terms scare you. The definite article is just the, like the house. And an indefinite article would be a or an, a house, or an apple. That's an indefinite article. Now, in Spanish, those are going to be different depending on the gender of the noun and whether it's singular or plural. So let's talk about masculine nouns. Our definite articles are going to be el and los. El for singular, los for plural. El libro, the book. Los libros, the books. Now, our indefinite articles are going to be un and unos. So, un libro is a book, and unos libros are some books. There is another way to say some. We could say algunos libros, but that's not what we're talking about today. We'll talk about that in a future lesson. Let's talk about our feminine nouns because that's what's important today because, well, that's for our TION, CION trick. In fact, let's use one of our tricks to do this. Change this word into Spanish. Option. What do you get? Opción. Opción. Now, our definite articles for our feminine nouns in Spanish are going to be la and las. La for singular, las for plural. So the option would be la opción. And the options would be las opciones. We have to agree in number and gender. You're going to hear me say that a lot as we move through the lessons. Now our indefinite articles for feminine nouns are going to be una and unas. An option would be una opción. And some options would be unas opciones. Now you may have already noticed this pattern on your own. If we want to make a Spanish noun plural and it ends with a vowel, we just add s. If it doesn't end with a vowel, we add es. So libro, book, would become libros, and opción would become opciones. Now let's get back to our TION, CION cognate trick. So change this word into Spanish. Decoration. Decoración. If we want to say the decoration, how do we say it? La decoración. If we want to say a decoration, how do we say it? Una decoración. And if we want to say the decorations, how do we say it? Las decoraciones. And if we want to say some decorations, how do we say it? Unas decoraciones. And you could say algunas decoraciones, but that's not what we're talking about in this lesson. So just stick with unas for now, and we'll cover the other one in a future lesson. So you've learned how to make a lot of nouns with the TION, CION cognate trick, but we're going to need some verbs if we ever hope to make sentences, right? Well, this is why this cognate trick is so powerful and why it's the best one out there, because you're actually going to be converting tons of these nouns into verbs. And that's what we're going to be using to make your first sentences, all right? So I'm going to show you how to do that. Take a look at these words: observation, information, and recommendation. Go ahead and change those into Spanish nouns. You shouldn't need too much time by now. Ready? Observación, información, and recomendación. Now take a look at those Spanish nouns. Do they end in ACION? Yes, all three of them do. And that's really important because if the noun we create ends in ACION, we can make it a verb in Spanish just by dropping the CION and adding an R. Observar, to observe. Informar, to inform. Recomendar, to recommend. It's that easy, folks. Now, if the word does not end in ACION, you cannot make it a verb, okay? Here's some examples. Opción, ficción, acción. They don't end in ACION, so they're just nouns, folks. A good way to use this trick is actually to think of it backwards. Let's say I ask you how to say to educate in Spanish, and you're a new Spanish speaker, so you're like, I have no idea, Paul. Try to think of a TION word linked to that verb. Can you think of one? Education, right? So then you kind of go through it the way we did before. Oh, education becomes educación. Does it end in ACION? Yes, so I can make it a verb by dropping CION and adding R. Educar, to educate. Now you try it. How do you say to create in Spanish? And do that backwards step. So what are we thinking first? Creation, right? That becomes creación. Now does that end in ACION? Yes, so we drop ción, add an R, and it becomes crear, to create. That's how it works, folks. What you're doing is using your knowledge of English and a known language pattern to come up with Spanish words that you may never have seen or heard before. But let's take it a step further. With the TION, CION cognate trick, you now know how to convert hundreds of verbs from English over to Spanish, but you may not know how to conjugate them, right? Especially if you're new to this. But no worries. One really neat thing about Spanish is that when you have a series of verbs together, you only have to conjugate the first one. Now we just want to start with a conjugated verb we're going to say a lot that we can pop our verbs into. So how about this one? I want. I want to create. I want to observe. I want to participate. This is a great one, right? So in Spanish, it's going to be yo quiero. Yo quiero. Now in Spanish, you can actually drop the subject if it's very clear from the verb conjugation or context who you're talking about. And with yo, it normally is, and I'll talk about that in another lesson. So the yo tends to go away. And this just becomes quiero. Quiero. Now this word by itself means I want. We're going to pop it right up there in the front of our sentence like a locomotive. And we're just going to be dropping in verbs. So go ahead and try this one. I want to participate. Feel free to pause the video if you need to, if you want to write it out. Are you ready? Quiero participar. Quiero participar. All you had to do was figure out to participate because you're just popping it into the formula. You didn't have to think how to conjugate the first verb because it's already conjugated. Now I've had students in the past tell me, Paul, that's just a lot of mental gymnastics to come up with a sentence. That's not really going to work in a real conversation. Think of it this way. You're only doing the mental gymnastics the first time. If I gave you a really complex math problem and you kind of went through it and you're like, okay, it's 17. And I show you the same math problem the next day, are you going to work it out again or are you just going to say 17? That's how this works too. As you start using it, you're going to get faster at it and you've kind of already worked out, participar. So if you need to say it in 10 minutes or the next day, you're not going, okay, participation, participar, you're going participar. When I started this video, I told you to be translating sentences by the end of it, and now the time has come. I've got sentences up here on the screen. You've got two ways you can do this. You can take a screenshot of it, pause the video, work them out on a piece of paper, which is what I recommend you do, especially if you're new to this technique, and then come back and see how you did. Now, for folks who think they have this down pat and can do it just this fast, I'm going to give you that opportunity too. As I go through these, I'm going to say them, and then I'm going to pause enough time where you can spit it out, and then I'm going to give you the answer. So either way you want to do this. You folks who want to take your time, go ahead and hit pause now, because I'm going to be moving on. All right, let's kick it off. I want to memorize the information. Quiero memorizar la información. I want to participate. Quiero participar. Now that one should have been fast because that was the example earlier. That's how it works. You're going to get better at this just through repetition. I want to examine the documentation. Quiero examinar la documentación. I want to organize the information. Quiero organizar la información. I want to certify the information. Quiero certificar la información. I want to cooperate. Quiero cooperar. I want to collaborate. And that's really common in Spanish. You talk about collaborating with someone, like working with them on something. Quiero colaborar. I want to confirm the description. Quiero confirmar la descripción. I want to continue the conversation. Quiero continuar la conversación. I want to prepare the documentation. Quiero preparar la documentación. I want to verify the information. Quiero verificar la información. I want to decorate the house. Quiero decorar la casa. So how'd you do on those? Did you get them all right? Now, I didn't talk about this before, but if you don't want to do something, all you have to do is insert the word no before the conjugated verb. No quiero, whatever. No quiero decorar la casa. I don't want to decorate the house. Now, I'm going to give you a tough one now. I'm going to call this the bonus round, all right? Let's see if you can get this. I don't want to speculate. Ready? No quiero especular. Did you get that one? Did you remember to pop in that E up there? If you're getting that one, well, you've nailed this. If you had some trouble with some of those, don't feel bad, all right? This is a lot of material in one video. Feel free to watch as many times as you want, go through them again, and really get this pattern down before moving on to the next video in the series. Well, that's it for the lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. But even more than that, I hope you enjoy this method of instruction because this is how the course is going to go. I'm going to be breaking down the Spanish language into a series of patterns and then showing you how to use those patterns to make sentences, paragraphs, how to have conversations, how to get over, lag times in conversations. I'm going to be sharing it all with you. So I'm excited about it. I hope you're excited about it too. Well, I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. So until next time, hasta luego.